Good morning. Happy Friday. Hopefully, you have watched the little video that I included in your Google Classroom on how to retell a story. If not, you need to do that. But anyway, in that video, it talked about how when you retell a story, you're telling the character, excuse me, the characters, the setting, where and when it happened, and the big events, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So we're going to practice that. I would like you to get a piece of paper and a pencil. You can pause the video and go get that, and then I'll read the story, and we're going to stop and take some notes, and then you're going to do something with those notes. All right, here we go. The Legend of the Teddy Bear. This goes along with what we've been learning. All right, the author's note page, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to get right to the story. You could always go into Epic and read it, though, if you wanted to. That's where I got this book from. In the days when America was a younger country and much of the land was filled with dense green forests, animals roamed freely through the great American wilderness. In the cities, the clip-clop of horses' feet could be heard as they pulled black buggies through bustling streets. Smoking black trains rolled across the countryside, connecting cities and towns to prairies and forests, moving travelers across the wild territories of America. All right, so there's our setting. It's in America, and it's back in the early 1900s, back when people traveled a lot by train. Whoa, got a little snap happy there. In those days, there lived a strong, adventurous man with a big, bushy mustache. He was the President of the United States of America, and his name was Theodore Roosevelt. The people of America adored their president, and they fondly called him Teddy. Teddy Roosevelt loved adventures. He loved to go exploring while riding on his horse, Manitou. Teddy wandered through the wooded valleys of Pennsylvania and climbed the towering peaks of the Colorado Rockies. He roamed the sweeping green prairies, marveling of nature's beauty. But one of the things Teddy loved to do the most was camp in the wide open spaces of America and fall asleep under a blanket of 1,000 twinkling stars. That sounds amazing. Teddy often rode on Manitou while hunting wild animals. In those days, many Americans hunted deer and bears. Teddy loved hunting too. During one trip, Teddy traveled to the states of Mississippi and Louisiana. The two states wanted this great and fair man to settle an argument about a boundary line. When his work was done, he decided to explore the green forests of Mississippi and go bear hunting. Late in the day on November 14th, 1902, so there's a date for us, that's when it happened, as the sun was setting, some of the men in the president's group cornered a young bear. Barking dogs surrounded the frightened bear as the men roped and tied it to a tree. One of the men cried out, "President Roosevelt, come quick, we have a bear for you." Branches cracked and twigs snapped as President Roosevelt raced Manitou through the thick forest. Hearing the excited voices of his men, he reached the clearing where the men and barking dogs were gathered. All were pointing at a bear that had been roped and tied to a tree. The frightened bear clawed at the rope, trying to free itself. The bear whipped his head back and forth. Its back feet kicked up clouds of dust and dirt. Teddy looked down at his rifle and then laid it on the ground. He shouted out to his men, "Stop badgering that bear. It is helpless. Let it go." Following the president's orders, the men cut the rope and let the bear go free. Yeah, he didn't want to just shoot a bear that someone caught for him. Hunters don't like to do that. All right. A few days later, a newspaper cartoonist named Clifford Berryman heard about the president's meeting with the bear. He drew a cartoon illustrating President Roosevelt and a wild bear. The cartoon first appeared in a newspaper called the Washington Post. People everywhere were talking about how the president had ordered his men to let a wild bear go free. Soon, the cartoon appeared in newspapers all over the country. People from New York to Michigan to California saw the cartoon and read about Teddy's kindness toward the defenseless bear. The nation's love for their president grew even stronger. All right, so I think we need to stop and talk about what happened here at the beginning of the story. So get your paper and pen or pencil ready. Well, we know our main character obviously is Teddy Roosevelt. You should write that down. Setting was America back in the early 1900s. So at the beginning, Teddy Roosevelt was bear hunting. He refused to shoot a defenseless young bear and told his men to set it free. A newspaper reporter heard about it and drew a cartoon that everyone in the country read about this incident. All right, so you can write that down in your own words. You can always look back in the story to see how to spell things, or back in the video in this case. All right, so you might need to pause the video and write down what happened at the beginning, and then I'll continue reading. A couple from New York, Rose and Morris Mitchum, saw the cartoon while reading their morning newspaper and, like so many other people of America, were touched by what President Roosevelt had done. Rose and Morris owned a candy shop. They loved having children visit their shop. Big glass jars stuffed full of brightly colored candy lined the shelves. The smell of peppermint and lemon drops and licorice sticks filled the air. There were shelves with porcelain dolls, shelves with wooden toy soldiers, and shelves with wind-up toy trains. Boy, they do a really good job of describing this candy shop. I could picture it, and I could even smell it in my imagination. Rose and Morris talked about their president's kindness as they prepared to open their candy shop that morning. As they talked about the bear in the cartoon, an idea for a new toy was born. Rose and Morris thought children might like a soft, cuddly toy, something a child could squeeze and hug while drifting off to sleep. They decided to make a stuffed toy bear. Rose and Morris both agreed that a soft, furry material the color of golden honey would be perfect. Morris skillfully cut out the pattern for each little limb and paw. He cut out patterns in the shape of a bear's head and body and then handed them to Rose. Rose always enjoyed sewing and sat quietly humming as she sewed the pieces together. She tenderly filled each part with fluffy stuffing. Each limb was attached to the body with a special metal wheel that was hidden under the golden fur. Just like a real bear, this toy bear's legs could move. Rose gently held the little bear's paw as she checked to see that each little limb moved up, down, and all the way around. Next, Rose used shiny black boot buttons for the eyes. As she delicately sewed black thread into the honey fur, forming a little nose and a mouth, Rose's eyes sparkled just like the boot button eyes of her new little bear. Rose nuzzled her face against the golden honey fur and thought, "You, little bear, will make a child very, very happy." The next morning, Rose awoke early and began to make another toy bear. As she sat touching the soft fur, Rose imagined how wonderful it would be if all the children in the world could have their own special bear. Rose and Morris excitedly placed the two stuffed bears in the front window of their candy shop. They smiled proudly at their two golden-colored bears as people passing by stopped and admired their new creations. I like the looks on these girls' faces as they're looking at them. The little bears didn't sit very long in the candy shop window, though. Before the end of the day, both bears had a new home. While Morris was closing up the candy store that evening, he suddenly realized they needed a name for their toy bears. What would be a good name? Teddy's bear, he thought. Morris wondered if their adventurous president would mind if they named their toy bears Teddy's bear. Morris thought the proper thing to do would be to ask the president if he minded. So he decided to write him a letter. In the letter, Morris told the president how Mr. Berryman's cartoon had inspired him and his wife to create two toy bears and how the children loved them. Morris told him how they were going to make more soft, cuddly bears, but they needed a name for them. Morris asked the president if they could use his name. All right, so I think we need to stop and take a note here on what happened in the middle of the story. All right, so we have this couple from New York, Rose and Morris, that owned a candy/toy shop. They read about the president's encounter with the bear and were inspired to sew a stuffed bear. And they wanted to name their new toy bear Teddy's Bear after the president because his story actually inspired them to make the bear. All right, so you'll probably want to pause the video and write down what happened here in the middle of the story. And I'll go ahead and read. While Morris was writing the letter, Rose began making another bear to escort the letter to the White House. Stitch by stitch, Rose carefully sewed the bear. While she was stitching the little bear, Morris thought of something. Rose, I believe our little messenger should dress up for such an important trip. Morris thought a vest would be very proper for a White House visit, and Rose agreed. Rose cut out and sewed a little leather vest. Next, she slipped the fancy vest onto the bear's little body. Then she fastened a small gold chain from one vest pocket to a buttonhole. It looked like their bear was wearing a pocket watch, just like President Roosevelt. Now the little bear looked ready for the White House, their hearts and minds filled with excitement as they gingerly placed the letter and the bear into a box. Rose and Morris addressed the package to President Theodore Roosevelt, the White House, Washington, D.C. Rose and Morris worried that a busy man like the President of the United States wouldn't have time to answer a letter about a toy bear. Day after day, week after week, Rose and Morris waited for a reply. They eagerly searched their mail for a letter from the President. Finally, one day, they received an envelope from the White House. Morris's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Rose's heart pounded. Inside, they found a handwritten letter from President Theodore Roosevelt. Nervously, Morris read the letter aloud. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Mitchum, I warmly thank you for your letter and the fine stuffed bear you made. I can hardly wait to show my children. However, I don't think my name is likely to be worth much in the toy bear business, but you are welcome to use it. I wish you great luck with your toy bear business. Sincerely, Theodore Roosevelt. The president loved the little bear and he approved of the name. Thereafter, Rose and Morris proudly named each bear Teddy's Bear. It wasn't long before little girls and boys were enjoying their very first stuffed bears made with love by Rose and Morris in honor of a great president. Millions and millions of children all around the world have since held on tightly to their teddy bears. A teddy bear is a trusted, faithful, and timeless friend whose dedication is always ready and never ending. All right, so we'll want to write down then what happened at the end. Rose and Morris sent a stuffed bear to Teddy Roosevelt and asked him if they could use his name for their new toy. He wrote back, yes, they could. And ever since then, they have been called teddy bears. So you'll want to pause and write that down. And so now I want to tell you about your assignment. All right. So whenever you write down your story retelling, it's called a summary. So that's what you're going to do. I will attach a Google Doc to your assignment here. And you're going to type in your summary, your beginning, your middle, your end of basically what happened in this book. And I'm making a contest out of this. I thought that might be kind of fun to make a contest out of it. So I'm going to choose one from each class who I think tried really hard on their summary and did a good job. And that one person from each class is going to get a prize that has something to do with the story that we just read. All right, so do your best, and I can't wait to read what you guys come up with. And that's all for today. There's no social studies lesson because we kind of learned some history when we read this book anyway, so it's a twofer.